Hello, this is Jim Schaefer, executive producer and host of Rip Rap, an academic book television program. My guest today is Marion, author of Food Politics, How the Food Industry Influences Nutrition and Health. Welcome to Rip Rap, Marion.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
This is a really exciting book. I thought it was an example of how thorough and careful research like yours can help people think through issues that affect society. Here we're talking about the big business of making food, a business in the range of nearly $1 trillion a year. So the first question that comes to mind is, how and why did you tackle this topic, especially with an eye to the politics of food?
Well, I was always interested in nutrition and health, and as a nutritionist, when you start looking at why people eat healthful diets or make the kinds of choices they do, I couldn't help but come up against what the food industry was doing right from the beginning. And when I went to Washington to edit the Surgeon General's report on nutrition and health, which was a book that came out in 1988, on my first day on the job, I was told that the Surgeon General's report could not say eat less meat because the Department of Agriculture would get upset and Congress would get upset, and that no matter what the research showed, you couldn't say eat less of anything. And in fact, the government never says eat less of anything. It says choose lean, or choose diets moderate in, or some other kind of euphemism for what is really meant to be eat less, because the Department of Agriculture can't tell people to eat less of American food products.
Well, the thing that I found really delightful is this isn't one of those things of you should eat this or you should eat that. It really gets into the substance of what's going on and the impact of big business as food corporations and their need to make profits through competition with people who become, through competition, and then the effect on the people who become overweight, that's being said, as you were saying earlier, eat more, eat more.
Well, I have a very simplistic way of looking at this. The food industry produces this fabulous food supply that gives us this incredible range of foods 12 months a year, regardless of season, and there are 320,000 separate food products. And all of that, not all in one place, and all of that adds up to about 3,800 calories for every single person in the United States, man, woman, child, any age. Well, most people don't eat that much. So that's an enormous surplus of an enormous overabundance of food. And what that means is that the food industry has to be really competitive. People can only eat so much. So the object of the game, if you're a food company, is to get people either to eat more of your product or to substitute your product for that of someone else. And it's a very slow-growing industry, maybe 1% a year on average, and that's well below the growth that's expected of corporations these days. So the companies have to, as part of the way the economy is working right now, do everything they can to sell products.
Well,
that's eat more.
Eat more.
That's eat more.
And buy more.
And they're good at it. They're really good at it.
You make the point that food companies use every means at their disposal, legal, regulatory, and societal, to create and protect an environment that's conducive to selling their products in a competitive marketplace. And that's part of it too. It's everything.
It's everything that they do. Think Enron. Everything that Enron did, food companies do, but on a much smaller scale. They advertise. They market. They have toys and games and products in stores. They do product placements in supermarkets. They advertise foods as healthy, whether they are or aren't. They supplement foods. They add herbs to foods. They lobby government. They talk to their Congress people. They lobby agencies, and they talk to food and nutrition professionals. They market to small children. They market to older adults. They market to minorities. They do everything they can, and they do it really, really well. People are eating more.
And enjoying it.
And enjoying it very much.
One of the points you make in your book is about deconstructing dietary advice, and I thought that was really marvelous because we get all these different suggestions about what we're supposed to be doing, and I think that was also reflected from your involvement with the Surgeon General's office. But it is helpful. I mean, we talk about pyramids, we talk about eat more carbohydrates, fewer carbohydrates.
Well, one of the things that always strikes me is how confused people are about what a good diet is and what they're supposed to eat, when I think the issues are just incredibly simple and dietary advice hasn't changed in 50 years. I mean, once we discovered that chronic diseases were the major causes of nutritional problems in the United States, then it was just a matter of eating less and eating less of certain kinds of foods, but mostly eating less. And the advice is the same. It really hasn't changed. It's eat less, move more, maybe eat more fruits and vegetables. That would be a good thing to do. And don't smoke, and that pretty much takes care of it. It's not very complicated.
Well, the advice they get is, as we were talking about, is contradictory. Don't do this and then do that, and that contradicts what they had before.
Well, I think it's very much in the interest of food companies to keep people confused about nutrition because they're trying to sell food. And anything that they can do that will encourage people to think that the products are healthy is a good thing for business.
One of the more unnerving points you make in Chapter 5 is that food companies will even seek to co-opt nutrition experts, especially one of those in the academy, as an explicit corporate strategy to establish an image of their products as nutritious. So I thought it was an extremely courageous position for you to take, and one that would seem to draw not a little attention by the food industry. But what measures are being taken to address this as an ethical issue?
Well, I actually hope it will gain a lot of attention because we're seeing the medical profession in incredible scrutiny about its relationships with drug companies. And we've already done that with cigarette companies. Now it's time to take on food. And food companies do exactly what cigarette and drug companies did. They sponsor journals, they sponsor conferences, they pay travel expenses, they give grants. They do all of those things. The medical journals are now doing full disclosure, and the nutrition journals are following. But I think the nutrition organizations need to take a really close look at their relationships with food companies, especially if they're allowing food company sponsorship and vetting of speakers at nutrition meetings. I mean, that happens all the time. If you speak at a sponsored session, the company has the right to decide who the speakers are going to be. And then the whole issue about research. If companies are sponsoring research, then you have to be very careful to try to put some kind of firewall between the company and what your research results and interpretation are likely to be. And most people in my acquaintance who take money from food companies are just outraged at the thought that it might influence them in some way. But I don't see how it can help but influence. And one of the things that happened when I was doing the research for this book was that nobody would talk to me on the record. But off the record, I talked to lots of people who received food industry grants and told me just one horror story after another of the way the companies, they wanted to see the data, they wanted to examine the data, they wanted to see copies of the papers before they were submitted. They argued about the way the interpretations were done. Sometimes they blocked the publication of the paper. I mean, there's a lot of that goes on. You just don't hear about it very much.
Is there a possibility of people who are doing that as ultimately being censured or some kind of action taken against them?
Well, I think it's so common and pervasive that relationships with companies are so pervasive in academic research and academic discussions that nobody even notices it. People don't think there's anything wrong with it. I mean, I've had people say, if we want to change the American diet, we have to work with food companies to do that, because people eat food that's produced by food companies, and that's certainly true. But I think there needs to be some kind of separation between where the company's money comes in and where an independent scholarship begins, and that's not always the case. Now, the medical journals, just within this past year, have developed this uniform policy that I think is just a terrific step forward, and I hope that the nutrition journals will soon follow. There's a lot of pressure now to disclose these kinds of things, as more and more embarrassing incidents have come to light.
When I read the second half of your book, beginning with part 3, I couldn't help but think of President Harry Truman's position of plain talk. I mean, you just set it out there, and the part 3 is the one that's called Exploiting Kids Corrupting Schools. And then it seemed like you had extended a very direct challenge to the food industry also in the next two parts, deregulating dietary supplements and inventing techno foods. What a lot of fun. I thought, boy, this is really, I mean, it really is incredible, and it's an incredible amount of money involved.
Yes, there's an extraordinary amount of money involved in all of these things. And if you're a food company and you're trying to protect your business, you want to sell foods. The part I think that is most distressing to me and that I'm most disturbed about is marketing to children, because children are a captive audience and they're really too young to be critically evaluating the kinds of messages that they're getting. And when a soft drink company says that it's deliberately marketing foods to its products to 8-year-olds, I think that causes a certain amount of eyebrow raising. They're deliberately marketing to 8-year-olds and they're proud of it? I mean, that's the part that seems so extraordinary to me. They think it's a completely normal part of corporate strategy to produce teaching materials for children, to go into schools and have free giveaways and product placements and advertising and all the other book covers and all the other things that food companies aren't the only companies that are doing that. There are others as well, but if you're worried about waistlines and childhood diabetes, which is becoming increasingly prevalent, you don't want your kids to be gaining weight and eating junk food in schools.
We even talk about the impact on children as young as 3 to 5 years old, and then this amazing statistic about the influence on parental spending that keeps increasing to, you're projecting maybe $500 billion.
That's not just food, however. I mean, that $500 billion figure is the figure that's been estimated that children influence parental spending, but it's on everything. It's toys and games and computers and all kinds of other things as well. But it's the food part that concerns me, because I don't know a single parent in my acquaintance who wants to argue with their children about food. You know, of all the things that there are to argue about food, about with children, you know, sex and drugs and all of those other kinds of things, you certainly don't want to get into arguments with your kids about whether they're going to have a sugar-coated cereal or not. And I think marketers take advantage of that. They know that parents don't want to argue with their kids about these kinds of things. And so they're deliberately marketing foods of different colors. Colors are very big right now. You know, there are now these new colored French fries that are coming into them, and colored ketchups that are coming. I don't know, the ketchup's not such a problem, but French fries? I don't think so. You know, I suppose kids think they're fun, but they're all designed, they're all eat more messages. And if in a situation where what you really want is for people to be balancing food intake against physical activity, you don't want so much eat more message, I don't think. And you don't want to be arguing with your kids about it, or seeing your local school district turn into a supermarket for kids.
Well, as I reflected on the book, I was wondering, we're in our contemporary society where more and more people are having processed foods because there's nobody home fixing it. And so now, you know, the supermarket becomes the all-purpose supplier of whatever you're going to eat. They often buy takeout just to get through the day, you know, for the next meal. So I thought that also kind of brings us even more front and center as an issue where maybe the kids are not responding to that, so then they got to find something else.
Well, half of the food dollar is now spent on food cooked outside the home, and there the difficulty is you have no way of knowing what's in it. You can't tell how many calories it is. You don't know what the portion size is. We just don't have any control over it, and we seem so programmed to eat whatever's put in front of us. I think that is also part of the cause of the obesity epidemic.
I've also been fascinated by how sometimes what results has only a dim reflection of what the source originally was. I mean, you've got meat that's been reconfigured, reprocessed, and then put into shapes that look like it may have been. You know, we've got cereals that are all kinds of shapes and colors and so forth. Where does all this information about the politics of food and specifically the food industry leave us? I was thinking about the photograph in your book, one of the bags that was the early 1990s souvenir of the old ways preservation. What a wonderful name.
Isn't that a great name?
And printed on the side was the slogan, "Vote with your fork for a sustainable future." In that conclusion, you make the point that, like the lesson learned in anti-smoking campaigns, efforts to improve eating habits must be environmental as well as personal, societal, and individual. The focus on societal determinants does not in any way deny the importance of individual responsibility for food choices. What a radical idea.
Well, I think that if we're looking at diets as our food system is a political system as well as anything else, and it raises, I see obesity as a political problem, and political problems require political solutions. You know, write your congressman, and
so that would be one of the planks of the political parties, is how do they stand on nutrition.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this, I think, traces back to campaign contributions and other kinds of things that you would never think were associated with people's nutritional status. And yet, if you want Congress to be concerned about the health of the American public, you've got to do something about corporate, the contributions of food companies to corporations.
And of course, one of the first places to start is become more informed about what is going on.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Otherwise, it's a good start toward that process.
Oh, thank you very much.
And it's, we've already said we really think that people ought to read it because it will help inform people about the real issues going on, and not just another one of these bland things of giving more dietary advice, or the gurus about people, well, you ought to do this diet, or that diet. This is what's behind the sweetness and sour of the food politics. So thank you for being on.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Hello, this is Jim Schaefer, the host and producer of Rip Rap, the academic book television program. We're having a special segment on this program to give you a little more background information on the interview we just completed with Marion Nestle on her book, Food Politics. It might be interesting for you to know that we did the interview in her office in a building on New York University's campus, only a few miles from Ground Zero in New York. Despite the serious topics we discussed with Marion about food and the food industry, we did notice some interesting sights around her office. One was a food clock, which we'll show you now. And then there was a carrot puppet. And a official Marion Nestle Food Politics t-shirt. And an entire set of food items, toys, put out by the McDonald's Corporation. These are just some, and there was also a Wheaties box. You know, they had that motif of the champions. We also talked with her, which we'll play now, the rationale behind how she worked with the designer on this cover for her book.
When you pressed it, but I think it's a brilliant cover. I just think it's gorgeous. I think it's gorgeous. What I talked to her about the cover, I said it had to be politics, health, and nutrition. And she had to find some way to visually do that conceptually. You want
Brilliant to put barcodes on.
Oh, it's just brilliant, and it's so pretty. I just think it's beautiful.
Good color.
You know, terrific color, and when you're done with this, I'll show you what her first design was. When we're off camera, I'll show you what her first design was.
No, I thought it was So we'd like to have you keep an eye out for RipRap. We have our website, RipRap, that's RIPRAP.org, and that lists all of our interviews. Right now we're in 34 cable systems and are broadcast weekly on WFUM TV. We look forward to going into other cities like New York, Chicago, and Boston, and Los Angeles. We had many other interviews that are coming up, including an interview with Todd Gitlin on his book, Media Unlimited, and then another interview that we did recently with Lonnie Guinier on her book, The Miner's Canary. We look forward to having even more interviews in the future, and we hope that you'll keep tuned to RipRap as we're going through these different books in academic literature. So do keep an eye out for us, and we'll be there. Again, thank you for watching this program. This is Jim Schaefer with RipRap.